Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Up next, we have Robin Ward. Robin is the co-founder of Discourse, the next-generation open-source forum software written in EmberJS and Ruby on Rails. It is one of the most starred projects on GitHub. During his spare time, Robin runs a blog at eviltrout.com, which is mostly about creating web browser applications. This afternoon, he'll be sharing with us some awesome Ember tricks to make your user experience much snappier. Please put your hands together for Robin Ward.
Why, thank you. Can everybody hear me well? Good. Thanks for making it to the penultimate talk of the day. I just recently learned that penultimate means second last, so I love showing that little fact off. So today I'm going to talk about Ember tricks. My name's Robin Ward, as just said. I'm Evil Trout on Twitter, if you want to follow me. You might know me better from like a cartoon trout. I think I'm one of the two people in the Ember community who is largely represented by a cartoon. The other one is Tom Dale, who is the hamster. And as mentioned, I work on Discourse. Discourse is open source forum software. You can download it today. It's really cool. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but I will reference it in the talk. So, EmberJS. The first thing I'd like to ask is, how many people here have used EmberJS? Oh, very few. OK, good. Well, not good, actually, but because you should all use it. But because I'm going to do a little intro. My thing is similar to what Grant did in that I'm going to start by just doing like a super fast beginner thing, and then I'm going to skip to some advanced stuff. So what is Ember? I like to call it a browser application framework. Some people like the term client MVC, but I don't really like that because I think that client MVC is a little different than server-side MVC, and that confuses a lot of people. A lot of people use the term single-page application, but I don't like that either because, sorry, this thing's falling off a lot. I don't like that either because it implies that you only have one URL. And in an Ember app, the URL changes all the time. What I really like to do is think of things as long-lived. Like, the user goes to your site, they request something, but then they keep that data around as they browse. They don't just throw it all away. In Harry's presentation at the beginning of the day, we saw how often in the old days of apps, you would go to a page and you would get all this memory and then you'd just throw it all away. And that was the standard for a long time. The big difference is that we're going to keep it around and you can do tons of cool things. Ember also uses handlebars as its templating engine. And I'll just show you a little sample here. Generally, oh, cool, it's readable. So here I have a file, welcome.handlebars, and it says hello name. And what Ember does is, and this is one of the biggest advantages of using a client-side browser application framework, is that you can do bindings. So here I have hello name, and of course it doesn't show anything. So I'm going to do a little live coding here. Say input value equals name, and get a little text box. And if I said something like hello evil trout, it would update right on the screen. You could say hello FITC. So this is one of the big benefits of using front-end framework, is that you can just render on the client side and it's super fast. Ember also values convention over configuration. This is something I think Yehuda Katz really liked about the Rails community. What do I mean by this? Ember is extremely opinionated. It expects you to call things certain ways. It expects you to put them in certain folders if you are assembling your app. Here's a little example. Typically in a router, here what I'm doing is I'm saying I have a resource called user, and I'm mapping it to the path /user. It's pretty simple stuff. If you do this in Ember, what it expects is that you have a user route class defined, a user controller, and a user handlebars. Now I say it expects. I mean, if you're putting logic in there, those need to exist. But if you just want the default behavior, you don't have to define them. But if you do define them, they have to be called that. Similarly, if you change it to something like product, it would expect it to be called product route, product controller, product handlebars. The main reason for doing this is developer productivity. You don't have to think about what to call things, where they go, and stuff like that. The idea is, as well, is that if you left your current development shop and went to another one, and you opened up their Ember project, you would already know where everything is. It's already laid out. You could get up to speed a lot faster. Lately, Ember's had a focus on web components. I don't know how many people here are familiar with them, but web components are a standard in the W3C that they're currently working on. The general idea is to define your own elements and templates and how that logic works. So Ember actually gives you a sneak peek of this today. Now, Yehuda Katz creator of Ember, is on the W3C, and he's working with them to make sure that the web components are like sane and stuff like that. And the advantage of that is that he also works on Ember and is making it so that Ember's syntax for defining your own components will be future-proof for when the web component standard comes into effect. So it's really easy to make a web component in Ember. What we have here is a handlebars file, and I've created a helper called Doge text, where I pass it two parameters, so text and such text. And then I have another file, which you just define called components/that. And automatically, down here, you get your rendering of what it should be. And of course, like if you change the parameters up here, it just works. So it's really fast to just get going and define your own components and their logic and stuff like that. So I really recommend you check that out. But we're here to talk about tricks. This is an advanced JavaScript day. So I'm going to jump into some of the more advanced concepts that will require a little bit of tutorial in advance, so I apologize for that. But I think show off some really cool things that you can do in EmberJS. So the first thing I want to show you is Ember's object model. So you can define a class in Ember like this. I'm creating one in the app namespace. You can call your app whatever you want. In Discourse, it's called Discourse. And if you say Ember object extend, this essentially is building a class, which you can then instantiate by using app user create and passing it like a hash of any parameters you want. So I'm creating the user object, or an instance of the user class, I should say, and then I can output using get. Similarly, if you said set, it would change the property. So this is the basic object model that underlines everything that you do in Ember. But Ember also has this really cool thing called computed properties. So here, what I'm doing is I'm creating another class, another user class, and I've created a computed property called staff. And the way you do that is you add a function, and you return what you want it to be. So in this case, staff means, are you a moderator or are you an admin? And it returns true in that case. So here you can see, I'll talk about how I call it first. So here I've created a user and I've said it's a moderator, and then I say, is it staff? And it says it's true. Now this weird function prototype thing here, property says this is a computed property. But what it's also saying is that this computed property depends on these two other properties. And why do we do that? It's for caching. That property back there will not update unless any of its dependent properties change. So if this was a really expensive operation, say, I don't know, doing a complicated hash or some kind of really intensive thing, it would have to recalculate every time you called get staff. Get staff will return the cached copy unless any of the dependent properties change. So here's what I meant by a computed property helper. Like, you don't have to always use that syntax where you create the function and then extend the function prototype. You could use these little helpers. So here's one called match. So if I just say, here's my property, valid username, and then I'm using this computed property macro here, and I say match username, and sorry, that has to go to another line, but it's a regular expression for the format. Here's another example. I can say an adult is a user whose age is greater than or equal to 18. Canadian, similarly, is one that's equal to the country of Canada. And the really cool thing about doing it this way is that they're composable. So here I've taken the adult and Canadian one from the previous example, but I've added can vote, and I've used Ember computed and. So I'm saying here, you can vote if you're an adult and you're Canadian. And again, like, it's keeping the object graph in mind here with the dependencies, and you don't have to do anything about it. Like, caching is one of the hardest problems in computer science, but here, just by outlining the dependencies, like, without even thinking about it, it knows to not recalculate any of those values. And when I say recalculate, I also mean when it's in a template. So if you have a handlebars template that has one of these values in it, and you change a dependent value, it will update that in the template right away. If the dependent value doesn't change, it knows not to update the template. The other really cool example of computed property macros is filtering. So here, I have a project class, and I have a computed property called open tickets. And what it's doing is it's using computed filter by. And it's saying, I have a tickets collection, look for the open ones. Well, the ones in this case where open is true. So if you created a project like this with a tickets array, and then said get open tickets, it would only return the ones where that filter is true. And again, because it's cached, if you changed one of the tickets to be open false, it would know to update. Otherwise, it would just return the same value. So that's pretty cool. I love computed properties. I think they're one of the coolest things about Ember. Try them out. Okay, number 2, the run loop. Okay, so this was actually mentioned in the first talk of the day by Harry about how Ember's run loop can be a little complicated. And I think it's a little true. The idea is that in Ember, essentially everything is asynchronous. So in this case here, I'm saying set product ID 1234. And then immediately afterwards, if you say this get product ID, you'll notice that it has the value. So that's what you'd expect. But the next line is looking at the HTML. And in this case, you notice that it's still the old value. And this is confusing, because you're like, well, I just set the product ID. Why is it the old value in the DOM? The reason is that updates are coalesced in Ember. If you do something like this, where you're setting them all in a row, the DOM is only updated once. Ember is smart enough to know that. How does this work? Well, there's an event queue in Ember. Sorry about this. Okay. Have you guys ever done something like this in JavaScript? If you do a set timeout with 1, it'll run this code after the next event loop. You can use it to create your own run loop with a, if you were creating your own run loop, you could do it like this. So, okay. So you can say, is there a run loop scheduled? If yes, add an event to it. If not, set timeout for the future. So the idea here is that you're performing an action that will trigger something to happen in the future. While a run loop exists, it can loop through the run loop and execute the events in sequence. So the idea here is sometimes you're triggering one, sometimes you're not, but otherwise you're adding to it, and it'll coalesce and perform all the operations in one go. So this sounds a little complicated, but the truth is Yagni. I don't know if you guys know what this means, but you ain't going to need it, usually. Here's an example from my friend Rob Harper about this. So here I'm creating a post view. And when the view is inserted into the DOM, it's calling did_insert_element. Did_insert_element is then using the little this.$sign helper in jQuery. What that does is it gets a handle on the current view, and it's saying, what's the height? And the next thing it's doing is it's taking the height, and it's multiplying it by 2 and setting it back. Now, the disadvantage with this is it causes a browser reflow. I think I can illustrate it here. So let's say you had 50 post views. It would be calling read the height, write the height, read the height, write the height. That would be essentially, I think, 100 reflows, if my math is correct, which is really, really slow on your browser. So you don't want to do this, especially on a mobile device where you really notice that. So there's a solution you can do, and that's de-interlacing the reads and the writes. So here's my de-interlaced version that uses the run loop. It's the same class, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm reading the height and putting it in a variable, but then I'm calling Ember run schedule after render. And I'm passing it a closure, and then in the closure, I'm setting the height. Now what this is doing is it's, the first time it's called, it'll instigate a new run loop, and then it'll add all those element heights to the next event queue. So we do all the reads in one go, and then when the event loop runs, it does all the writes. So instead, what you get is 2 reflows, and that's much, much faster. So that's a really cool example of something you can do in Ember because it has its built-in structure. You can also coalesce yourself. This is less common, but I wanted to show an example of it. So here, you can use Ember run schedule once, and after render is the event that we want to trigger, and then you pass a context and a method name. In this case, because I've said schedule once, if I called this like 10 times, the run loop is smart enough to coalesce and join them all into one, so that the annoying alert there would only happen once. So you might want to use this in your code if you have parts where it's hard to keep track that you're calling the same thing multiple times and you only want it to happen once. Use it responsibly. Like, this is really important. Just because this tool is there doesn't mean that you should just start using it everywhere in your code. It's an advanced tool. The API is public, but you want to be very careful that you're not making your apps too hard to follow and too complicated. In the case of performance, really good. So I recommend it there. OK. Third trick I wanted to show you is about a custom resolver. So if you recall what I said earlier, that Ember really values convention over configuration. So the way I think I showed something similar to this, but essentially it knows how to resolve that I want the template user and look for the template with the ID of user. In this case, it's usually a script tag or something formatted in advance. But the cool thing is that it's extensible. You can define your own resolvers. So here's an example of one that basically, instead of looking, it uses the pre-existing behavior in Ember by extending the Ember default resolver, but instead it looks for the uppercased name. So this might be if you had someone using, like, I don't know, DOS to create their templates or something like that, where everything is uppercase. But yeah, so it'll just basically do the same thing. So even though it is conventional, you can modify the convention. Here's probably a better example, and this is something we do in Discourse. It's a mobile resolver. So when it goes to resolve the template, it first looks for the original template. Now, don't worry about if the code is a little long. The basic idea is actually not that complicated. And then it says, if the app is in mobile mode, look for a template that is prefixed with mobile and return that instead. Otherwise, return the original. So in just a few lines of code here, what we're doing is making it so that it'll look on mobile for a template by that name, mob, whatever. If it exists, return that. Otherwise, use the original one. Now, I know you're probably going to say you should doing responsive design. You shouldn't be using custom templates. You should use one template and one set of CSS. But there are times where you have just like a lot of bindings or a lot of HTML that's just like really slowing down your mobile experience, and you want like an alternate template. So this is a really cool way that you can just go into Ember's exposed internals and just swap that out. Okay, this is the final trick I wanted to show you, which is view cloaking. So we discussed this earlier, but everything in Ember is an Ember view. You can see here, a typical app looks like this. You have the application view container that contains a header view, that contains a profile, et cetera, all the way down. So here we have post views and part of the index view. This comes with a little bit of a downside if you're not careful, is that if you have many, many views, your rendering is going to be slower. So in particular, if you have like 1,000 rows in a table and each row has 15 columns, it's just going to render really, really slowly. So what can we do about this? Discourse uses infinite scrolling. Very controversial, but I really like it. If you don't know what infinite scrolling is, it's kind of a browser hack, and it works something like this. So imagine that all these like dotted lines are posts. And we'll see if it works when I click. Aha. Okay, so normally the user is scrolling down, and as they approach the bottom of the DOM, we observe the scroll position. It says load new elements. And those new elements are squeezed in underneath, and you just keep scrolling. And if everything works properly, the user gets like a smooth experience. The problem with this is memory bloat, and Discourse did this for a really long time. For about a year, we would just keep appending posts as you scrolled down. So if you were reading a mega thread, as we call it, you could have 1,000 posts, and it's just like append, 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 and we're never clearing that memory. So that's kind of a problem. So potential solution, what if we could unload the views that were off screen? Now, this has a problem as well, which is that if you're scrolling down and you're inserting all sorts of views, and then you remove one above you, it actually jumps the viewport. And that's incredibly uneasy, and like when especially when you're reading something like a conversation between people, the last thing you want to see is that like everything just like shoved into a different direction. So we have another solution for this, and that's cloaking. So what we've done in Discourse is we created this concept of a cloaked view, and a cloaked view contains the post view because views can contain each other. So here's like some pseudocode. So let's say we create a cloaked view instance, and we listened on the Windows scroll events, and then when the cloaked view goes off screen, what we can do is using jQuery, we can fix the height of the cloaked view, the parent view in this case, to what it currently is, and then detach the child instance, and just like throw it aside. Then if the view comes back onto the screen, we can reattach it. It sounds pretty complicated, but it's actually not that hard. So today, last night, I released Ember cloaking, which you can get on GitHub. And what it actually is a drop-in replacement for the collection tag. So normally in Ember, what you do is you use this collection tag to say, oh, I have a collection of posts, and the view class is post view. So the new version has a very similar API. You say cloaked collection, and you say cloak view post, and then immediately it'll start observing this behavior. You don't have to use infinite scrolling, although it helps because the more you scroll, the more stuff goes on and off the screen. So in theory, if you have an Ember project today, you could swap this in, and then as you scroll things away, you'll be binding less, you'll be rendering less, and things should just speed up. So we actually noticed 30% less RAM when we started doing this as we're browsing the site, which is really cool. Because in our case, we're actually still keeping the posts models in memory. We're just removing them from the DOM. And we're removing the Ember wiring and all that binding and all that stuff that does the magic to updating. But still, it used a lot less RAM and was a lot more responsive. On Android in particular, it loaded a second faster. So yeah, try it out. Redirect all your complaints to me on Twitter. I would love to hear them. I'm going to do a recap here. Computer property macros are awesome. You can cache them. They're composable. They're filterable. The run loop, you can schedule and coalesce all your events. Custom resolvers let you wire things to your heart's content and really change how things are resolved. And then cloaked views are really fast and use less RAM. I think in particular, the cloaked views are a testament to Ember's flexibility in that it's only about, I think it's under 300 lines of code, including all the comments, to drastically change this behavior. So yeah, EmberJS is awesome. This is just a taste of the advanced things you can do. There's a lot of intermediate and beginner and easy wins that you can get with it as well, but this is an advanced talk, and I wanted to go over some of that stuff. You can learn a lot more about EmberJS at emberjs.com. Discourse, of course, is on GitHub. Please fork it, send us pull requests. Many people consider it like a reference app for EmberJS. Don't assume that everything in there is always gold. I always tell this to people because it's a huge project under continuous development, so sometimes things might be a little awful, but we love pull requests and we love discussing it. And just want to say thanks. I'm Evil Trout. I think I went super fast, but if you guys have any questions about Ember or anything, I'd love to hear them. Anyone?
The full collection thing is really cool because you managed just to swap out the collection class.
Yeah.
To get that behavior. How much of Ember is architected around data structures like that?
So the question is, how much of Ember is architected around data structures such that I could swap in the cloaked view for the collection view? Well, everything in Ember is a view when you get down to it in terms of the rendering aspect of things. And everything is either a web component or a helper. And you can extend any of them, and you can do stuff like that. So I'd say it's really easy to do something like that. I mean, I'm a little more familiar with the internals, so my solution, there's probably an easier solution than what I did that would have been a little slower, but because I knew some of the internals from some previous Ember core work that I did, I was able to do it in a different way. But yeah, I think it's highly extensible. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes.
What does Google developer page speed insights tell you about this poking? Does it say it's bad? A lot of times it's criticizing hidden objects.
You're saying, what does Google page speed tell me about this?
You use Google developers to check your work and see how it works?
You know, I honestly haven't used that in a while. I use Google Chrome and their development tools all the time with all the advanced profiling stuff. But the page speed thing, that's the thing where it goes to your URL and it downloads it. I don't honestly, maybe someone here can tell me, I don't even know if that works with a browser application, where the whole application is JavaScript. It has to instantiate everything and do all the rendering. So to get to the point where it can actually cloak the views and scroll, I'm skeptical that it's that advanced, but maybe it is, I don't know. The way we do profiling is, like I said, heavily with the Chrome profiler tools. They have great stuff. You can just say, create profile your memory, profile your performance, the reflows, all that stuff, and then just use your app, create files. Yeah, it's been pretty easy. Their home key? Oh, you mean to adjust the scroll position? Okay, that is a little unfortunate right now. What it does is it does jump to the top of the current segment. So assuming you entered a topic and scrolled down, it does have all the correct stuff back in the history, because if you recall, it replaced everything with elements of the same height. So for a fraction of a second, you would see it white until the scroll thing triggered it to render it. So there's actually, I didn't show you this, but there's a parameter called slack. And different devices, I give more or less slack. So I don't actually not render something the second it comes into the screen. Like I actually do it off screen below and above. Because the idea is as the user is scrolling, if they're scrolling quickly, you don't actually want to see that kind of thing. But if they are on something like an iPad and they swipe it really fast and has inertia, or if they hit the home key, they're going to get to the top of the document, and then you're going to see a split-second flash before the content loads in. So that's like a downside to the approach. Do you have more to ask? Well, I keep the first 2 or 3. The question was, why not keep the first 2 or 3 in memory by measuring the viewport height? In terms of what you're currently looking at, I do measure, I do keep 1 or 2 pages above or below. I don't keep everything above, because if I kept everything above, then that has the performance issue. Oh, okay, I see. So so what you're suggesting, unless I'm incorrect, is that keep the very topmost ones as a home button fix. Okay, that would work, and it's worth considering, but there's another issue in that topics can be sometimes thousands of posts long. And generally what happens is, well, nobody tends to read a topic all in one go, but sometimes people will read, go away, and come back, and they jump to the bottom. Now, we don't load all 1,000 posts ever. We actually paginate that. So there's 2 levels of cloaking in a sense. We have the dynamic loading of data from the server, which is into pages based on how far you are, and then we also have the cloaking of the views above that to make sure that it's fast on the client side. So that would work if you came in at the top, I think. If you came in at the bottom of like a 100 post topic and you hit home, it would actually take you to the top of the viewport as we know it. So in that case, we're doing upwards infinite scrolling, which is actually insanely hard. And we do it. It's just hard to get right. So we've spent scrolling downwards, adding elements below your current position in the DOM is not hard, but adding them above is super hard because that height changing stuff. So we do a lot of hacks that are remember where you were when the loading started, and then after it loads, then it starts inserting. But I have this thing called lock on, which just for a few seconds, is assuming you don't touch the scroll bar, it'll constantly keep you locked onto things in case images are loading. And it's a huge hack, and I hate it, but there's no other way, as far as I know, to insert elements above you. So that I think would kind of prevent the home hack. In my experience, though, people don't do it that often. People generally come in to the bottom of a topic and read downwards, or they come in at the top and read downwards. Up is kind of a special case, and I'm okay making the user interface a little worse just to make everything else better. Anyone else? Cool. All right, well, thanks a lot, guys.